Well, good morning and welcome back to Musings of a Texas Preacher Man. I'm Scott Fisher and I'm glad you've chosen to study with me this morning. This week we've been looking at the subject of the blood of Abel. The blood of Abel is mentioned in the New Testament 3 times. We looked at Jesus' reference to it in Matthew 23 and Luke 11, and today we're going to begin to unpack the prophetic and eschatological nature of the vindication of the blood of the martyrs, Abel's blood being the first. In both Matthew 23 and Luke 11, Jesus stated that all of the blood of the righteous, from Abel through Zechariah, was being held against this generation. He's prophesying of the coming destruction of Jerusalem that was going to come upon that generation. And it was going to happen in fulfillment of all that was written. This takes us back to the Old Testament. What was written, what was prophesied, what was going to find its fulfillment in the coming of Jesus and the impending destruction of Jerusalem and their temple. And Moses prophesied that this was going to happen. And it's this prophecy that Jesus is referring back to. But first, let's establish what God is up to. In Isaiah chapter 46, verses 5 through 7, the Lord compares himself with pagan idols. Verse 5, to whom would you liken me and make me equal and compare me that we would be alike? Those who lavish gold from the purse and weigh silver on the scale hire a goldsmith, and he makes it into a god. They bow down, indeed they worship it. They lift it upon the shoulder and carry it. They set it in its place, and it stands there. It does not move from its place. Though one may cry to it, it cannot answer. It cannot deliver him from his distress. And then God follows this up with a statement of principle, that he alone is God, and there is no other, and that he declares the end from the beginning. Now, this is an incredible statement. We read it in Isaiah 46, beginning at verse 8. Remember this and be assured. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things long past. For I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is no one like me. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things which have not been done, saying, my purpose will be established, and I will accomplish all my good pleasure. Now, this is a specific prophecy concerning the end of the Old Covenant era, and it refers back to the beginning of the Old Covenant era. It's establishment under Moses at Mount Sinai. Now remember, Paul explained that the 2 women, Hagar and Sarah, are 2 covenants. One proceeding from Mount Sinai, and the other from the Jerusalem above, the heavenly Jerusalem. Hagar and her son Ishmael, according to Paul, represented 1st century apostate Judaism, proceeding from Mount Sinai. And Sarah and Isaac represented the new covenant saints proceeding from the heavenly Jerusalem, the Jerusalem above. Now in Deuteronomy chapter 28 to 30, Moses articulates the blessings and cursings of the covenant. Blessings if they remain faithful to the covenant, and cursings if they transgress the covenant. And then the Lord instructs Moses to compose a song for the children of Israel and teach the song to them. We read it in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verses 19 to 22. Now therefore write this song for yourselves and teach it to the sons of Israel. Put it on their lips so that this song may be a witness for me against the sons of Israel. For when I bring them into the land flowing with milk and honey, which I swore to their fathers, and they have eaten and are satisfied and become prosperous, Then they will turn to other gods and serve them and spurn me and break my covenant. Then it shall come about when many evils and troubles have come upon them, that this song will testify before them as a witness. For it shall not be forgotten from the lips of their descendants. For I know their intent, which they are developing today, before I've even brought them into the land which I swore. So Moses wrote this song the same day and taught it to the sons of Israel. Now this song, according to the word of the Lord to Moses, was to serve as a witness against Israel throughout their days, throughout their generations, because God knew their end from the beginning. It's a prophetic word concerning the end of Old Covenant Israel. And it's known as the Song of Moses. And it's recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 32. It is prophetic, it is apocalyptic, and it is eschatological. It is a prophecy of what will occur in the distant future from the time that Moses gives it to him. It's a prophecy regarding their latter end. Now, I want to begin first of all with verse 5 because it uses a key phrase that gets picked up by Jesus. Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 5. Speaking, prophesying of Israel in the future at their latter end. They have acted corruptly toward him. They are not his children because of their defect, but they are a perverse and crooked generation. Now, Hal Lindsay popularized the phrase, the terminal generation. And beginning with his popular book in the 1970s, The Late Great Planet Earth, he has for the past 50 years taught that we are the terminal generation, the generation that will experience the second coming of Jesus and the end of the world as we know it. But Moses declared that there was coming a future generation of Israelites that would be a, quote, perverse and crooked generation. A generation that would completely reject God and come under a complete destruction. It would be Israel's last generation, the true terminal generation. And Jesus, Peter, and Paul all referred to that first century generation of apostate Jews as a perverse and crooked generation. And it's not by coincidence. They were stating emphatically that this first century assembly of Israelites was the fulfillment of the prophecy of Deuteronomy chapter 32. First of all, Jesus addressed the wickedness of that generation in Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12, beginning at verse 38. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees said to him, Teacher, we want to see a sign from you. But he answered and said to them, An evil and adulterous generation craves for a sign, and yet no sign will be given to it but the sign of Jonah the prophet. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the sea monster, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh, now notice this, the men of Nineveh will stand up with this generation at the judgment, and they will condemn it because they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. The queen of the south will rise up with this generation at the judgment and will condemn it. This generation, why? Because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. Now, Jesus calls his generation an evil and adulterous generation, and then speaks of the judgment that's going to come against this generation. In Jesus' Olivet Discourse, his prophecy of the coming destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, he says in Matthew 24, verse 34, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place." In Acts chapter 2, Peter's message to the Jews on the day of Pentecost, he declares to them that they had put Jesus to death and that God had raised him up. Now we pick it up in verse 23. "This man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men, and you put him to death. But God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power." Peter continues in verse 36, "Therefore, let all the house of Israel know for certain that God has made him, Jesus, both Lord and Christ," or both Lord and Messiah. "This Jesus whom you crucified." And in verse 40, Peter declares the following, "And with many other words, he solemnly testified and kept on exhorting them, saying, Be saved from this perverse generation." Paul used the same words in writing to the Philippians. Philippians chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. "Do all things without grumbling or disputing, so that you will prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, children of God, above reproach in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world." That first century generation of Israelites who killed Jesus was the terminal generation. They were the generation that Moses prophesied about. They were the generation that was held accountable by God for all of the righteous blood shed of all of the prophets and the righteous ones, from Abel through Zechariah, through Jesus and the apostles. And just as Jesus prophesied, it happened. Well, I want to thank you for studying with me this morning. Now, if what I'm sharing with you goes against what you've always believed, don't be afraid or intimidated. Let the scriptures be your source. And we'll be picking up right here again tomorrow morning as we continue our study of the truth of the Messianic kingdom and continue to look at the vengeance poured out on Jerusalem for the blood of the righteous. Now, I want to thank you for joining me for Musings of a Texas Preacher Man, and I hope you'll continue to join me Tuesday mornings through Friday mornings each week right here. Now, why not click on the subscribe button on the lower right corner of your screen, and you'll be notified in YouTube whenever a new video gets posted. And if you're watching on Facebook, consider sharing this on your wall and invite your friends to watch it. And if you saw it on Twitter, retweet it and encourage your friends to watch. And if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, why not join me on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. for Tuesday Nights in the Word. Hey, come out and join us. And I hope you'll go out and make today a great day.